My beloved child, pause for just a moment, because the secret connected to your soulmate may already be sitting somewhere online, quietly waiting for you to notice what you have been overlooking. There is something strangely specific about this message. You may have been checking, scrolling, searching, or casually opening certain places online without realizing that your attention keeps returning to the same person, the same name, the same photograph, the same kind of message, or even the same tiny detail. And that is where this story becomes interesting. What if your soulmate has been revealing something without directly saying it? What if the thing you thought was random was actually connected to a feeling you could never completely explain? Before you move away from this message, listen closely, because the biggest revelation is not simply that your soulmate may be online right now. The real revelation is what they may be hiding behind what they choose to show. They could appear completely normal on the outside, posting, watching, liking, disappearing, returning, staying silent, but underneath that silence may be an emotion they have never known how to put into words. And there is one detail you need to notice. When someone has truly moved on emotionally, they usually stop looking back. But when someone is still carrying an unfinished connection, their behavior can become strangely inconsistent. One day they appear visible, the next they vanish. One moment they seem distant, and then suddenly something appears that feels almost personally connected to you. Maybe it is a song. Maybe it is a sentence. Maybe it is a photograph. Maybe it is a simple phrase that somehow reaches a part of your heart you thought had gone quiet. Do not rush past that feeling. This is where the hidden story begins, because your soulmate's secret may not be hidden in what they posted. It may be hidden in what they almost posted, and then decided not to. There is another layer to this that you probably did not expect. Your soulmate may be online right now, but the most important thing may be what they are doing when nobody knows they are watching. Imagine someone opening their phone, typing something, staring at the screen for several seconds, and then deleting it. Imagine them visiting a profile and leaving without interacting. Imagine them seeing something that reminds them of you and suddenly becoming quiet. That tiny moment can reveal more than a dramatic confession ever could. Because people often reveal their deepest emotions through hesitation. They hesitate before reaching out. They hesitate before posting. They hesitate before admitting that someone still matters. And if your soulmate has been carrying feelings they cannot easily explain, their online presence may contain little fragments of that internal conflict. You may have noticed strange timing, repeated appearances, unexpected silence, or subtle changes in the way they present themselves. Perhaps they suddenly seem more reflective. Perhaps they are sharing things about loyalty, timing, memories, growth, or second chances. Perhaps they are not mentioning you at all, and somehow that silence feels louder than words. Here is the surprising part: sometimes the strongest clue is not a direct message. It is a pattern. A pattern you only recognize when you stop looking at individual moments and start looking at everything together. And somewhere inside that pattern may be one detail that changes the entire meaning of what you have been seeing. Your soulmate may have been trying to communicate indirectly because saying your name would make the situation too real. They may be wondering whether you still care. They may be wondering whether you would recognize the meaning behind something they posted. They may even be waiting for some sign that approaching you would not be rejected or misunderstood. But there is an emotional wall between what they feel and what they are willing to reveal. And that wall is exactly why the next part matters so much. Now listen carefully, because this is where the secret becomes personal. Your soulmate may have a private thought about you that they have never expressed, and it could be completely different from what their silence made you believe. You may have assumed they forgot. You may have assumed they stopped caring. You may have assumed that if they truly wanted you, they would have already made everything obvious. But human emotions do not always move in straight lines. Sometimes someone can miss you and still remain silent. Sometimes they can care deeply and still hesitate. Sometimes they can watch from a distance because they are trying to understand whether the connection they feel is real or simply a memory they cannot release. And if you have felt that strange pull toward checking something online, do not automatically treat it as proof of anything supernatural. Instead, treat it as an invitation to pay attention to your own emotional awareness. What exactly are you hoping to find? What would you want your soulmate to say if they suddenly appeared in front of you? What truth have you secretly wished they would admit? Those questions may reveal why this message feels so intense. Because perhaps the hidden secret is not only about what your soulmate is doing. Perhaps it is about what both of you have been unable to say. Somewhere between two silent hearts, there may be a conversation that never happened. There may be an apology that was never spoken. There may be a feeling that was dismissed too quickly. There may be a memory that still carries more weight than either person wants to admit. And here is the twist. Your soulmate could be closer to revealing that truth than you realize, but not necessarily through some dramatic announcement. It could begin with something incredibly small, a change in behavior, a carefully chosen post, a sudden appearance, or an unexpected attempt to reconnect. The clue may look ordinary to everyone else. But to you, it may feel unmistakably familiar. And just when you think you understand what this hidden secret is about, there is one final piece you need to hold on to. Your soulmate's online presence may not be asking you to chase them. It may be showing you something much more meaningful, whether you are ready to recognize the difference between genuine connection and wishful thinking. Because the strongest soulmate story is not built on constantly checking a screen, decoding every post, or waiting desperately for one person to make a move. It is built on truth. And the truth may be that your soulmate is wrestling with a decision they have kept private for longer than you know. They may be deciding whether to finally express something they have repeatedly pushed aside. They may be remembering how you made them feel rather than simply remembering what happened. They may be comparing the peace they felt around you with the uncertainty they have experienced since you became distant. And that comparison could be changing something inside them. There is a reason the idea of them being online right now feels so powerful, because somewhere in that digital world, there may be a small clue that reveals which direction their heart is moving. But do not look for the obvious clue. Look for the unexpected one. The thing that seems too small to matter. The sentence that sounds ordinary but carries unusual emotion. The sudden return of something connected to an old memory. The moment they become visible after being silent. The detail they choose when they could have chosen anything. Because sometimes the biggest confession begins as something almost invisible. And there is one particular sign that could reveal whether your soulmate is simply living their life online, or quietly leaving a door open for you. That sign is connected to something they thought you would never notice. And once you understand what it is, you may look at everything they have been doing completely differently. The strangest part is this. Your soulmate may not realize how much they are revealing without saying your name. Think about how carefully people behave when they genuinely want to hide an emotion. They become selective. They remove certain things. They post something and then change it. They appear confident while quietly checking whether someone specific has noticed. And sometimes, the person they are trying hardest not to think about becomes the person they keep accidentally circling back toward. Your soulmate could be doing exactly that. Maybe they have recently shared something that seems completely unrelated to you, yet the timing feels almost impossible to ignore. Maybe a particular song suddenly appeared. Maybe they posted about missing someone, changing, growing, choosing peace, or finally understanding what truly matters. You could easily scroll past it and think, that means nothing. But what if the meaning is not in the post itself? What if the meaning is in why they chose to share it now? That is where the hidden layer begins. Because your soulmate may be trying to express an emotion without having to face the vulnerability of directly expressing it to you. They can hide behind a screen. They can communicate through a picture, a quote, a song, or even silence. But they cannot completely hide the pattern of their behavior. And somewhere in that pattern could be a confession they are not yet brave enough to speak. They might be wondering whether you are still watching. They might wonder whether you would recognize something intended for you. They might even be testing the emotional distance between you without wanting to admit that they are doing it. But there is something even more surprising. Your soulmate may have already imagined what would happen if you suddenly contacted them. They may have replayed that possibility in their mind more than once. They may have pictured your first words, their response, the awkward silence, and then the conversation they secretly wish could happen. And that means their silence may not be empty at all. It may be filled with a conversation that has never reached the screen. But here is where you need to pay attention, because the next clue is much more subtle. Your soulmate may be showing a different version of themselves online than the person you remember. And that change could matter. Perhaps they seem happier. Perhaps they seem quieter. Perhaps they are suddenly focused on becoming better, stronger, calmer, or more mature. Maybe they have stopped showing certain parts of their life. Maybe they no longer chase attention. Maybe they are posting less but thinking more. These changes can happen for countless reasons, so do not assume every online action is secretly about you. But if this person has genuinely been reflecting on the relationship, there may be one emotional shift you can recognize. They stop trying to prove something and start trying to understand something. They begin asking themselves questions they avoided before. Why did I pull away? Why does this person still cross my mind? Why do certain memories still feel unfinished? What would happen if I stopped pretending I did not care? Those questions are powerful because they move a person from performance into honesty. And honesty is where hidden feelings begin to surface. Your soulmate might not be ready to make a grand declaration, but they could be reaching the point where pretending everything is completely over no longer feels convincing to them. Maybe they are seeing something differently now because time has changed their perspective. Maybe distance gave them clarity that closeness never could. Maybe losing regular access to you made them recognize how much your presence had become part of their emotional world. And there is one thought they may keep returning to: what if I had handled it differently? That question can stay with someone for a very long time. It can appear while driving, while listening to music, while lying awake, or while casually scrolling through an ordinary evening. And if they are online right now, perhaps they are not looking for everyone. Perhaps they are looking for something that reminds them of a particular feeling. Something that takes them back to you. There is a moment in every unfinished connection when curiosity becomes courage. Your soulmate may be approaching that moment. Not necessarily because some magical force is controlling their actions, but because their own emotions may finally be becoming impossible to ignore. And this is why you should not chase every clue. Let the pattern reveal itself naturally. If they genuinely want to reconnect, their actions will eventually become clearer than any cryptic post. Their consistency will matter more than one mysterious upload. Their willingness to communicate will matter more than a hidden reference. And if this connection truly deserves another chapter, it should not require you to constantly decode silence. Still, there is something emotionally fascinating about the possibility that your soulmate is online right now, thinking about whether you can somehow sense what they cannot yet say. They may be wondering if you have changed. They may be wondering whether you would still recognize the person they have become. They may be afraid that too much time has passed. And perhaps their biggest private question is not, do they still love me? It is, would they still choose to hear me out? That is a completely different question. Because it suggests that they are not only thinking about the past. They are thinking about the possibility of a future conversation. Somewhere inside them, they may be preparing words that they have rehearsed silently. They may want to explain why they disappeared, why they stayed quiet, why they acted differently than they felt, or why they could not give you the clarity you deserved. And the most emotional part is that they may not even know how you would react. They could be carrying both hope and uncertainty at the same time. That tension is exactly what makes their online behavior so difficult to read. They want to be seen, but they do not want to feel exposed. They want to reach out, but they fear what happens after the first message. They want you to understand, but they do not know how to explain everything they have been carrying. And maybe that is why the secret has remained a secret for so long. So if you are still listening, remember this: the real revelation may not be that your soulmate is secretly watching you right now. The deeper revelation is that someone who once felt emotionally certain may now be questioning everything they thought they knew about this connection. They may be discovering that time did not erase the memory the way they expected. They may be realizing that moving forward does not automatically mean forgetting. They may be understanding that certain people leave an emotional imprint that cannot simply be replaced by another conversation or another connection. And if they have been online, perhaps they have been searching for a way to express what they cannot comfortably say directly. But there is one specific thing that could expose the truth. The moment their online behavior suddenly becomes connected to something only the two of you would understand. Not a generic quote. Not a random song. Not something that could apply to anyone. Something unusually specific. A reference to a place, a phrase, a memory, a detail, or a moment that carries meaning because you were there. If that happens, do not immediately assume it was meant for you. Look at the bigger pattern. Is there consistency? Is there real effort? Is there eventually direct communication? Because that is where fantasy ends and genuine connection begins. And perhaps your soulmate is getting closer to that exact point. They may be realizing that indirect signals can only go so far. At some point, someone has to stop hiding behind the screen and speak honestly. And when that moment comes, the words may not begin with, "I miss you." They may begin with something far more unexpected. Something connected to the one memory they thought you had both forgotten. And that is the secret you have not seen yet. Something has changed in the way your soulmate carries this connection, and you may have sensed it before you had the words to explain it. They may still look completely normal online, but underneath that ordinary appearance, there could be a question they keep returning to: what if I never really stopped caring? That question is powerful because it forces someone to look back at everything they tried to move beyond. Your soulmate may have told themselves that enough time had passed, that the memories had become less important, that life had moved forward and there was no reason to revisit the past. But then something unexpectedly reminds them of you. A familiar song. A place. A phrase. A photograph. A certain time of day. Suddenly, a memory they thought was finished feels strangely alive again. And instead of simply remembering what happened, they begin remembering how they felt when they were with you. That distinction changes everything. Because people can forget conversations, dates, and small details, but emotional memories can remain surprisingly persistent. Your soulmate may be discovering that what they miss is not simply your presence. They may miss the version of themselves that existed around you. The calm. The excitement. The feeling of being understood without having to explain every little thing. And perhaps that realization is exactly why they have been spending more time looking backward than they expected. They may be checking old conversations, revisiting familiar places online, or quietly observing from a distance. Not necessarily because they have already decided what they want, but because they are trying to understand why you still matter. And there is something they may have recently realized that changes the entire story. They did not lose interest in you because the connection meant nothing. They may have stepped away because they did not know how to handle what the connection was asking them to confront within themselves. Now comes the part your soulmate may never openly admit. There could be a particular moment between you that they remember differently now. At the time, perhaps it seemed ordinary. Maybe you said something simple. Maybe you looked at them in a certain way. Maybe there was a conversation that ended too quickly. Maybe one of you walked away believing the other person understood what was happening, when in reality neither person had the courage to say what they truly felt. Years, months, or even weeks later, that tiny moment can suddenly take on a completely different meaning. Your soulmate may be replaying it mentally and realizing, should have said more. That kind of regret is quiet. It does not always appear in public. It can hide behind confidence, busy schedules, new routines, and perfectly normal social media activity. But when the noise disappears, the unanswered question remains. What would have happened if they had been honest then? What if they had not allowed pride, uncertainty, timing, or fear of rejection to influence the decision? What if the connection deserved more patience? Your soulmate may be asking themselves those questions now. And perhaps the reason their online behavior has started feeling unusual is because they are trying to find evidence that you might still be emotionally open to them. They may not want to send a message and discover that you have completely moved on. They may be looking for some indication that the door is not permanently closed. That does not mean every post is a secret message, and you should never feel pressured to interpret ordinary online behavior as proof. But if their actions eventually become more direct, consistent, and respectful, then you may be witnessing something much more meaningful than a coincidence. You may be watching someone move from silent curiosity toward honest communication. There is another revelation hidden beneath all of this, and it may be the one that surprises you most. Your soulmate could be realizing that the person they were searching for in other connections was not necessarily a different person at all. They may have been searching for a familiar emotional experience, the ease, the understanding, the depth, the feeling of being genuinely seen, and discovering that replacing a person is not the same as replacing a connection. Maybe they met new people. Maybe they tried to distract themselves. Maybe they convinced themselves that the next chapter would make the previous one irrelevant. But eventually, comparison can become unavoidable. Not comparison of appearance, popularity, or lifestyle. Emotional comparison. How easily can I be myself? How safe does conversation feel? Do I feel heard? Do I feel like I can be honest? Do I feel peaceful after talking to this person, or do I feel like I am constantly performing? And if your soulmate has quietly been asking those questions, they may have discovered something uncomfortable. The connection with you affected them more deeply than they admitted. That realization can make someone revisit the past, but it can also make them more careful. They may not want to repeat the same mistakes. They may understand that returning to someone is not enough. If they ever come back into your life, they need to come with clarity, maturity, and genuine effort. That is why the next sign matters. Do not focus on whether they simply appear online. Focus on whether they begin making choices that show emotional growth. Do they become more consistent? Do they communicate instead of disappearing? Do they take responsibility for what happened? Do they stop relying on hints and begin speaking honestly? Those are the signs that matter. Because the greatest soulmate revelation is not that someone secretly misses you. It is that someone finally understands what they would need to do differently if they ever got another opportunity. And this brings us to the hidden detail that may have been sitting in front of you all along. Your soulmate may have one thing they associate with you so strongly that they cannot encounter it without thinking about you. It could be a song, a location, a phrase, a certain date, an inside joke, a type of photograph, or something so ordinary that nobody else would understand why it matters. You may have forgotten it completely. They may not have. And if they are online right now, that tiny connection could be resurfacing through something they see or share. Imagine them scrolling without thinking about you, then suddenly stopping because something reminds them of that exact memory. For a few seconds, the outside world disappears. They remember your voice. They remember the atmosphere. They remember what they felt but never explained. And then comes the question they have been avoiding: should I finally say something? That is the moment this entire story has been building toward. Because the secret is not simply whether your soulmate remembers you. The secret is whether remembering you is beginning to change what they are willing to do. A memory is passive. A decision is active. And if your soulmate has reached the point where memory is turning into a decision, the next chapter could look completely different. The first indication may be subtle, almost too subtle to recognize. Then another sign may follow. Then another. And suddenly, what seemed like random online behavior begins forming a pattern. But before that happens, there is one thing your soulmate may be waiting to discover about you. Something they cannot learn from a photograph, a profile, or a silent view. They need to know whether the person they remember still exists beneath everything that has changed. And that question may be the reason they are closer to reaching out than you think.